In the late Middle Ages, an Italian merchant named Francesco Dattini opened his account ledgers with a curious inscription. He wrote, quite literally, "In the name of God and profit." Dattini, and thousands like him, lived in a state of constant, grinding terror. On Sundays, the church warned them that charging interest on a loan was usury, a mortal sin guaranteeing eternal damnation. On Mondays, they faced a marketplace that could wipe out their earthly livelihoods in an afternoon. We think of financial history as a dry progression of interest rates and bank charters. Look closely at the ledgers, and a predictable cycle emerges, a recurring rhythm of manias, panics, and crashes. This tension between spiritual salvation and earthly greed defines the early capitalist experience, a cycle where moral anxiety and financial ambition are locked in a permanent, high-stakes struggle. The cycle always begins with a spark. Economists call this a displacement. A displacement is an outside event, like the end of a war or a technological breakthrough, that changes the economic landscape and creates legitimate, new avenues to build wealth. In the 19th century, the steam locomotive cut cross-continental travel times from months to days, opening distant markets and promising returns that were previously impossible. Following a displacement, the initial wave of investment is sober. Rational actors buy into a project to use it or to sell their shares for a modest, calculated markup. Then, the dynamic shifts. You watch your neighbor invest in that new railroad line, and soon he buys a larger estate and a custom carriage. This triggers the demonstration effect, a psychological phenomenon where watching a friend get rich immediately bypasses the rational brain. Envy directly attacks the ego. It slowly transforms cautious, independent individuals into a single, synchronized herd, terrified of missing out. Once that herd begins to move, the market shifts from a tool of rational utility into a manic phase known as euphoria. In this state, the blinding desire for profit quickly silences any lingering moral anxiety. You might assume that a towering intellect would protect you from the herd. Let me introduce you to Sir Isaac Newton. The genius who mapped the laws of gravity was an early participant in the South Sea bubble. This chart plots the early trajectory of the South Sea Company's stock. Newton, acting with perfect rationality, bought shares early in the boom. He secured a profit of £7,000, a massive fortune for the era, and exited the market at this precise, safe point. But then he sat on the sidelines. Day after day, he watched the stock climb. He watched less intelligent peers multiply their wealth while his own fortune sat idle. The psychological agony of the demonstration effect gnawed at him. Unable to bear it, Newton capitulated. He bought back in at the highest possible price, just before the illusion evaporated. He lost £20,000, roughly $3 million in today's money. For the rest of his life, the great scientist, embarrassed by his failure, forbade anyone in his presence from ever speaking the words South Sea. If the man who calculated the motions of the planets cannot calculate the madness of crowds, standard human rationality offers zero protection once euphoria takes hold. As the boom accelerates, investors engage in overtrading. Overtrading is a dangerous phase where people stop buying assets for their intrinsic value and buy them solely to sell to a greater fool at an even higher price. In 1720, companies successfully raised capital for the most absurd ventures, including one designed to turn sawdust into solid boards and another completely secret enterprise described only as an undertaking of great advantage. Economic historians call this demand-determined swindling. When a market overheats, the public wants to be deceived. They demand unrealistic returns, and the market provides necessary fictions to keep the boom alive. The distinction between legitimate business and outright theft dissolves. Directors bribe politicians to secure favorable charters. Insiders engage in stock jobbing, a practice where manipulators artificially inflate share prices by spreading false rumors before selling off their holdings. As the boom reaches its absolute zenith, The merchants' early prayers for salvation are completely forgotten. They are replaced by a blind, consuming desperation to maintain the fragile illusion of their new wealth at any cost. Eventually, the credit stretches too thin. Euphoria gives way to revulsion. Revulsion is the sudden, collective, and terrifying realization across the market that investors no longer want overvalued assets, they strictly want hard cash. The available credit instantly evaporates. In a matter of hours, the euphoric herd turns into a panicked mob, triggering a violent stampede for the exits as everyone tries to liquidate their holdings simultaneously. For those exposed, the historical wages of this financial sin are exceptionally grim. When the South Sea bubble burst, insiders took their own lives, while 19th century bank swindlers abandoned their families and fled across borders in the dead of night to escape massive debts. The terrifying reality of the crash validates the early merchants' initial anxiety. The staggering profits they recorded in their ledgers were always a temporary illusion, but the resulting financial ruin is permanent. Francesco Dattini attempted to resolve his personal moral conflict by donating his vast fortune to the poor, hoping to buy his way out of hell. The modern world requires a systemic, mathematical resolution to market panics. This diagram illustrates the modern financial safety net, a concept known as the lender of last resort. In a crisis, a central banking authority injects massive amounts of cash liquidity into a collapsing economic network, lending freely to solvent firms to force stabilization. We no longer look to the church to save our souls from the sin of usury. Instead, we look to the central bank to save our assets from the devastation of deflation. Yet, despite centuries of complex financial architecture, the underlying human hardware remains exactly the same. The jealousy, the fear, and the blinding greed are still written into our code. Financial markets operate as a collective mirror of human psychology. We repeat the cycle of mania and panic because the underlying hardware of jealousy and fear hasn't changed since Dattini first put pen to parchment.